Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. For most people, this is a name that will conjure up the frivolous melodies of Eine kleine Nachtmusik, or the familiar tune of Rondo alla Turca, more commonly known as the Turkish March. But Mozart is far more than this common, simple stereotype of happy music, of carefree spirit. Mozart was a master of emotion, drama, and mortality. His greatest works all contain these themes of melancholy, of this bittersweetness that is so beautiful and profound. And so today, for this presentation, I would like to explore some of those themes of death in his piano sonata in A minor, more specifically, the second movement. Mozart was born in Salzburg in 1756, and from a young age, his musical talent was discovered and cultivated by his father, Leopold Mozart, who also authored the book on violin playing. It's a treatise. And here you see a cover page of it. As a young child, Mozart and his family toured Europe. They were met with great success. He even met the French Queen at one point. And during his travels, he matured a lot as a musician because he was able to meet so many excellent performers, teachers, and other composers that helped him grow in his journey. So in 1773, he returned to Salzburg, his home, and came under the employment of the Archbishop Hieronymus Colloredo. However, after a few years, the relationship between the Archbishop and the Mozart family soured. So in 1777, Mozart resigned his post at the Archbishop's place, and then he set off on a new tour, this time to Mannheim and Paris, accompanied by his mother. Unfortunately, on July 3rd of 1778, during his stay in Paris, Mozart's mother passed away. During that summer of 1778, Mozart composed one of his great minor key masterpieces, which is the subject of this presentation, the piano sonata in A minor. And unfortunately, we do not know very much about the exact circumstance of the background of the composition, unlike most of Mozart's other compositions. But we can certainly imagine that it was because he was suffering from such grief from the loss of his mother. Because this sonata is such a drastic departure in style compared to everything that he wrote before. So, for example, let's take a look at his previous piano sonatas. They're all written in major keys. And we can notice that for the opening bars, every one of them, they outline the home key of that sonata. There's no difference. It's all very traditional. But then, in his eighth sonata, this A minor sonata, he starts out with this curious little figure, a dissonance of a minor second, which is already quite unorthodox for his style. And under that, for the left-hand accompaniment, he has this relentless chord progression. He's hammering out these chords. It's as if his heart is pounding and he's questioning what will come next in his life because he's so uncertain now that his mother has just passed away in a country that's not his own, and he's all alone now. Here you see this repeated note motif in the first movement. You can see all of these repeated chords. Now this idea of repeated notes, it shows up in all three movements of the sonata. Let's now listen to a little bit of the first movement, just to the end of just the first half of the exposition section. first movement continues on for many more minutes in the same manner of drama and tragedy. Then, in the second movement, which is a slow movement, lyrical, in F major, Mozart seems to be giving his audience some respite from all this pain that they have just heard in his music. But it only seems like that, because he's not actually going to do that. In the middle section, the development section of the second movement, Mozart starts out quite innocuously, quite traditionally. He starts in C major, which is the dominant of F major. Again, this is still all orthodox. But soon, he turns it back into minor key areas. He moves about into many different keys, creating a sense of instability. The left hand takes over. It strikes out this solemn, descending motif that has an air of inevitability about it, while the right hand has the repeated note motif again. So he creates this entirely three-dimensional soundscape in that middle section. After a minute and a half of tension, he finally brings it all back down, back to silence, and he gives the audience a tiny bit of silence before he launches right back into the recapitulation section, again with the lyrical main theme. Let's listen to the beginning of the second movement. The third and final movement is characterized by perpetuum mobile. This means that throughout the entirety of the movement, the music is constantly moving forward. There's never a point of stopping. And Mozart moves on through many different themes and episodes because it is a rondo. There's one episode where he suddenly moves into the parallel major, A major, and at that point, it seems like a rustic dance. The listener almost has the hope that Mozart is going to end the sonata in almost an extended Picardy third. There's some hope left, there's some light at the end of the tunnel, but no, Mozart moves right back to the main A minor theme. And right before he ends the sonata, the repeated note motif comes back one last time. In octaves, in both hands, hammering out the dominant note of E. Right before he ends the sonata after a cadential 6/4, he declares it in A minor. It's a very powerful ending. Let's just listen to the ending of the sonata now. Let's wind back a bit, back to the second movement. We're going to take a look at the harmonic and motivic development section. Here's an analysis that I made of it. So as I mentioned before, we're in C major because this being the development section, we're going to start in the dominant. So Mozart has this rising arpeggio motif, and here he develops this main first theme. This is all quite natural, quite traditional, and here he hits a perfect, authentic cadence. But surprisingly, he does not cadence into C major, but C minor. And then in the right hand, we have the rising arpeggio motif again, but it is augmented, which means that it's played twice as slow. This continues on, and here we can see that he's moving through different key areas by a technique called the circle of fifths, which is a very common technique. So he goes D7, resolves to G minor, at A7, and then suddenly, just for coloration purposes, to make things more interesting, he throws in a German augmented sixth chord, and in its resolution, he cleverly evades a common problem of parallel fifths. He simply omits the fifth altogether. And now we're finally resolving into D minor. Now this is the point I mentioned before, where the right hand has the repeated notes and left hand takes over. So left hand has the inversion of the augmented arpeggio motif, which means that it's turned upside down. And in right hand, we have whole chains of 9/8 suspensions, which add a lot of tension to the music. Mozart moves through D minor, moves to G minor, F major, and here, it almost seems like he's preparing for a resolution into C major, but he does not give us that. He pushes onward. He evades that resolution, moves onward to D minor, and then C minor. We arrive at this secondary dominant chord, it's a D dominant by the way, moves to G minor, just very briefly, and then we're back. He is tonicizing F major, the home key again. We're about to return. He lands on a dominant pedal on C, but then he just has to throw in a diminished chord, and then finally an Italian augmented six, because he wants to create more tension. He wants this to be colorful and three-dimensional. And finally, we have our half cadence here. A very brief moment of silence before this arpeggio motif comes back. And we're going back into the recapitulation. The main theme of the second movement comes back. Now for the second part of this lecture, I want to show everyone two different interpretations of very famous pianists, Martha Argerich and Mitsuko Uchida, playing this very selection. They have somewhat different approaches, and I think it's very valuable to compare both of them to see how the same piece of music can be so different when played by different people. Let's first listen to Argerich. Argerich takes a relatively fast tempo for this section. She also plays like water. She plays it as if it's water from a bubbling stream. It's all, flows along very nicely. And we can hear that inverted arpeggio motif in the left hand. It's not too strong. It's there, but it's not really in our faces. And now for something different. Let's listen to Mitsuko Uchida. Uchida has quite the no-nonsense approach. She begins this section a lot more slow, it's a lot more solemn, and she plays it as if she's playing Beethoven, because there's so much power behind her sound and her touch that this passage is just transformed into a perfect representation of the pain that it's supposed to be expressing. I think by far the most striking element of Uchida's playing here is the manner in which she treats the left hand. Here, this inversion of that motif, it's marked with these little dots. These are staccato dots. And this means that the notes are meant to be played short and separate. But Uchida doesn't really do this. Instead, she connects them in such a way that they sound kind of separate, but at the same time, they're all connected in one big phrase. And I believe that is what really makes her interpretation of this section so effective. If you compare that to someone else, for example, Grigory Sokolov, Sokolov takes this part very literally. He plays it just as it is written, separate. And that is, in fact, what I used to do before. I used to play those staccato notes short, as they are. But maybe it was a month ago, or a month and a half ago, when I first listened to the way Uchida played it, I immediately incorporated that manner of playing into my own interpretation. And there's one other element that I am similar with Uchida, in that we both independently came up with the same idea of how to treat the right hand in this passage. Since it's all repeated notes, there must be some way to make this more interesting, and Mozart already does this in the music. He jumps up an octave every now and then. And I just think that it's important for the pianist to highlight every high note here. Highlight it, to accent it a little bit more, so that it acts as a third melodic line. And that's above all the rest, which just makes this section a lot more interesting. So finally, we will hear my recording. I recorded it on my phone, so it may not be of the best audio quality, but I hope that it will still come across with the right effect. This is a list of the sources that I consulted during my preparation and my research for this presentation lecture. If anyone is interested in looking at these sources at all, they are outside by the entrance. So I hope this presentation has been somewhat informative. I hope that it gave more context as to the story behind a great composition. I hope that this will make it more clear that oftentimes behind every great piece of music, there is a bigger story that's waiting to be told, and that when you're listening to any sort of music, that you might want to just look a little deeper into the context in which it was created. I hope that you have thoroughly enjoyed tonight so far, all of these wonderful performances, and I hope you will also enjoy the subsequent performances. Thank you very much.